Welcome back, Blerd Nation. Would you believe that mathematics began between 20,000 to 18,000 BCE with the Ishango bone tally game tool in Africa? Well, Africa is the origin to the world's earliest form of mathematical and foundational thinking, as well as the birthplace for both basic and advanced arithmetics. Today we're going to add more Black math geniuses, subtract stereotypes in the math education so we can be equal for the future of Black mathematicians. But before we go on this mathematical journey, make sure you hit the like button, drop some comments, and subscribe to the BlerdOut movement.
Confidence, yeah. It really shouldn't be no arguments, cause you're now viewing the greatest of all time, saying I can't get better, I promise.
Dr. Assata Moore is the creator of Black Math Genius tutoring program and began teaching as early as 18. Assata is a former high school principal and teacher. As a teacher and principal, she traveled the world teaching other teachers how to teach mathematics, physics, and engineering in a fun and engaging way. Effective leadership and systems and strategies for running a successful school. Assata believes in the genius of Black people and spends her time teaching parents and educators how to induce the genius out of Black children. But wait, there's more. She also is a STEM influencer, an educational coach, and a Presidential Award nominee for math. And last but not least, she's a proud Black woman from the South Side of Chicago. Welcome, Dr. Assata Moore. So first and foremost, just wanted to get started. I recently saw a quote on your website, and that really touched me. I thought it was super powerful. I'm just going to read it. Infusing history, confidence, and understanding into the learning process is how Black math genius is different and effective. It is amazing what a little bit of truth and knowledge can do for children who have been disconnected from their history and achievements of their ancestors. I love that. Like that's your quote, correct?
Yes.
Yes, love that. So can you kind of just tell our audience about, who you are, what you've done, your birth name even, and how you got started with the Black Math Genius program?
Absolutely. My birth name is LaMelody Moore. And in college, once you start reading and learning your history, you want to identify more so with your own people.
Yes.
And after reading the book Assata, I chose the African name Assata. But I didn't want to dishonor my mom by legally changing it. Mm-hmm. So I go by Assata, but people know me as LaMelody. And it really doesn't matter to me what you call me because they both fit.
Yes.
And
Love
I've
that.
been a educator since 18. And so I started volunteering at a charter school when I was an engineering student at Michigan State University. Loved math. And I picked up on the genius. I was given the work that I was doing in my college classes, and they were picking up on it. And so that just set into motion from that moment 30 years ago to where I'm at now.
Okay. Love it. Yeah. I'm actually from Michigan as well. So born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Didn't go to Michigan State. I left the state to go to school at an HBCU, but love that you went to Michigan State. A lot of good times up there. So you're born and raised in the city of Chicago. Of course, you've seen a lot of different challenges and probably have a very different perspective of how to address the community. Like, what has it been like for you with your program in Black Math Genius and addressing the youth in Chicago?
It's a challenge to get people to understand the urgency that's needed with getting our children where they need to be academically so that they can thrive as adults. We only spend so much of a small percentage of our lives as children, as teenagers. And once you hit that adult mark, it's all adulting from there.
Yeah.
But we don't do a good enough job of preparing our children especially Black children, for adulthood. And so what I'm wanting people to understand in Chicago and throughout is that these math scores are dismal, and it's having an astonishingly negative impact on their career choices, which in turn impact the wealth that they're able to accumulate or not accumulate. And in our cases, we're not accumulating it.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And so, can you talk a little bit more about how the test scores are impacting them negatively?
Yeah, and so what happens across the country, in the States, students start testing at third grade, right? So a third grader is what, 9, 10 years old. Right now, it's predicted that by the year 2053, that Black people are going to have a median net worth of $0.
Whoa.
Our net worth is diminishing. Yeah, I was making a connection between the top 60 careers of the future and where our math scores are at. And all of the top 60 careers of the future are STEM related. And if you can't do the math, you're not going into AI, you're not going into data science, you're not going into engineering, the medical field, so on and so forth.
Got it. And one of the things you were mentioning is that by the year 2053,
Yes.
that the wealth of Black people will be zero.
Yes, it's estimated. And this is on a report. It's called the Road to Zero Wealth.
The road to zero wealth. And is that because of our lack of aptitude as it relates to mathematics, technology, innovation? Like, what does it speak to the reasons
I
why?
equate it to the mathematics because what's happening is we're not going into the careers that are giving us a good income to be able to live where we're not living paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
And so then if it's about the careers, then what are the careers that will earn you those high incomes? They're STEM incomes. What do you need for STEM? Mathematics.
Right. Absolutely. And speaking of which, so I mean, you've been teaching and you've been on this journey since the age of 18. Like, what have been some of the pivotal moments that you've seen and experienced to get you to this point today? And what we need to know from you to be successful in the future?
Yeah, and so I got to this point. I had an excellent African-centered principal when I started volunteering at her school that believed in Black excellence, Dr. Freya Rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And she introduced me to some of the scholars. And so Dr. Maulana Karinga, the founder of Kwanzaa, I know him well. Dr. Malefi Asante, father of Afrocentricity. I went out to LA to visit Dr. Amyam's Palmer School, the Marcus Garvey Academy that was doing some exceptional stuff.
Yeah.
And so this is in the 90s. Went out and did some work with Dr. Asa Hilliard when he was alive in Atlanta, Georgia, right?
Yeah.
Anthony Browder was on a panel with Dr. Van Sertima. So like the heavy hitters, I'm in my 20s and able to be around these people that had a very deep understanding of the importance of tapping back into your roots and knew what Black excellence was.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I just put the mathematics on top of African-centeredness. So that was the pivotal piece back in the mid to late 90s. And so that really set me on a path to realize the importance of being deeply and unapologetically Black.
Yeah.
And to be on this mission of making sure that I do my part to make sure that our people are in a good space. And math is the medium that I'm choosing to do that.
Yeah, man, I love this right here. Like, I mean, you're totally speaking the blurred out language, like, 'cause that's what it was all about. Is that how do we hear our voices? How do we get into certain spaces and be excited and about our excellence? One of the things, the programs I have, I talk about how we invented math, we invented technology, we invented there's language, everything, right? There's proof of all of this. As a matter of fact, you mentioned Brother Anthony Browder. I actually had an opportunity to speak on a panel with him in Guyana some years ago when I first met him.
Nice.
I read his books, and then I was just sitting there with him and like, whoa. And some of the others, there's so many powerful people that come out of Chicago that I've been reading up on. And in fact, you're one of them, so I've been kind of just looking into. So thank you for sharing that. The Black Math Genius is a unique initiative that empowers children and tapping into their excellence and their intelligence. What inspired you to really create this program to make sure that we don't continue to suffer?
Because I saw the genius in children before I even thought of doing the program.
Yeah.
And so I'm a junior in engineering at Michigan State. I'm coming in, bringing them the stuff, and I'm doing my Physics 184 class. That's a second level college physics class.
Yep.
I'm coming in, talking to them about thermodynamics. I'm teaching them how to code, not with a template or an app where you just plug in, drag stuff around, but using HTML code, right? And so everything that I'm giving them, they're eating it up. To the point where you're familiar with Blackboard, the platform Blackboard, what colleges use?
Yes.
Well, when Blackboard first came out, we piloted their program with my middle school students to take AP Physics online. our email at that time was AOL, the plug-in one. So
That's a
so,
minute ago.
but they're middle school students taking AP physics, right? We're going to Cedar Point with Bowling Green University to study the physics of roller coasters. We're going to Detroit to the Ford Museum to look at the engineering behind building cars, right?
Yeah.
We even took students, you're talking about Anthony Browder, we even took students to Egypt to study the mathematics of the pyramid, all before they had graduated from elementary school.
Wow.
So what else do you call it but Black math genius?
Man, that is heavy. I
Yeah.
would have loved to have been a kid, in those some of those programs because I was not like you mentioned, like even in the math class, I was great at math. Became an engineer because of math, and a math teacher kind of guided me that way. But understanding the foundation, that part is not taught in school, right? We miss all of that. They don't tell us where we're from, right? Your program kind of really digs deep into the roots of who we are and why we should be proud of the technology, and then going up against a machine that's systematically built to stop us, right? And when you can predict 30 years out from right now and say you all will be broke if you don't do this, like who's sharing that message? Right.
But meanwhile in Chicago we're looking at spending over $4 billion to build a new Bears stadium.
Say that.
When the majority of our students, Black, white, or otherwise, can't read or do math on grade level.
Yeah,
but that's where we choose to spend our resources.
Exactly. And one point, I know you focus on math and STEM related stuff, but possibly you might know this, but isn't it the third grade Reenie level is what they use to predict how many prisons they're going to build, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Again, one of those things that our community just doesn't realize, that if you can't read, they can already predict the number of prisons they need. And so there's these predictability solutions already out there in the field, and they've been doing this for years, right? And they were doing it on
But
paper.
If they know about it and they've done the research, don't you know that they have the resources and the wherewithal to actually solve the problem? But they choose not to.
They choose not to.
Because it's profitable to private corporations to run prisons and to get that next to free labor.
Wow. Yeah. Man, that's heavy. So, like, can you elaborate on what are some of your teaching methods and practices that you put in place to encourage these Black kids and they make sure they inherit the gift that you're bringing to them?
The first thing is the African-centered piece that we spoke deeply of. Okay, mathematics originated in Africa. There's evidence of this. It was found in the Lubombo Mountains of South Africa. There was this bone that suggested that Black women started using mathematics to track their cycle against the lunar calendar. So the African-centered aspect is very important. So an example of the African-centered piece is we call it the Pythagorean theorem. I call it the Kemetic theorem because Pythagoras studied for 23 years in Egypt under Black people. So he didn't learn that. And there's evidence of this in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, Khafre's, and Menkare's pyramid in ancient Egypt. So the African-centered piece. The next piece is for it to be advanced, for it to be accelerated. So if you can teach a baby what's 1 + 1, you can do 2 × 1. So now you can teach that 2-year-old, that 3-year-old multiplication. But then if they can do 1 + 1 is 2 + 1 is 3 + 1 is 4, now they can find the perimeter of a square. And we can use that language. And instead of saying count to 10, we can say, give me the first 10 consecutive numbers. We can introduce advanced terminology. We can say, give me the first 10 positive integers, right? And so the next piece is teach the material at an advanced level. If you can give them calculus and they can eat it up, give it to them. And then the other piece is that you want it to be application-based. You want it to be interesting. So I don't need to give you a worksheet for homework. I can say, I want you to go home tonight. I want you to watch the NFL draft that just happened. And I want you to look at the number of quarterbacks that were chosen in the first 12 rounds. Yep. And then I want you to compare that to historical data. And then if you want to be petty with it, I want you to look at the NFL draft again. Pay attention to how many brothers showed up with sisters on their arm. Now we're being petty. Maybe you don't want to do that one.
We being petty.
What was the
But that's
percentage?
okay.
What was the percentage that showed up? Right.
But you're speaking to the very thing that everybody was talking about, but nobody did the math and say, you know, this is how many brothers went to the NFL this past week. You know, of that, what I think there were 6 in the first 12, probably.
Yeah,
and
6 of the first 12, so 50%, right?
50% of them, right, were quarterbacks.
Right.
And
now,
how
I
many
didn't keep up with how many showed up with a sister, but I did see how many that didn't show up with a sister, right?
You know.
But the other thing is you can dig deep and say, now, what is the economic impact of that going to be when you take half of that wealth and give it back to white families? And what does that look like over generations, right? So
powerful, super powerful.
So 3 A's: African-centered, advanced, and application-based. Okay. That's Black Math Genius.
That's Black Math Genius. And do you, you know, exercise the same methods when you're talking about physics, engineering? Like those are more advanced fields. Like that's going beyond just the basic math. Like, do you use the same? And what's that experience been like?
Yeah, I integrated. So I've done a unit called arithmetic.
Okay.
And so whatever the mathematics is that I need to teach for the standards, I can take, okay, these are the Common Core standards y'all want me to teach. I'm going to build my own type of unit on top of that. So we're going to do arithmetic, the mathematics of hearing. We're going to talk about decimals. We're going to talk about the hearing ranges of insets versus such and such, right? So it's still doing the mathematics, but even at a more advanced level. And now they're taking a look at, never thought about the mathematics of hearing. Oh, you measure that in decibels, right? Well, how does that relate to music? Oh, when you look at the writing of music, right? When you look at a musical sheet, you have measures that are written as a fraction, right?
Yep.
That tells you the number of beats within it. So that's how I do it, as opposed to say, okay, we're doing addition today. We're doing subtraction tomorrow, right? It's this whole experience with mathematics.
So is our school districts able to get your curriculum and bring it into the classroom? And I mean, is there some type of strategy around like classrooms that are, you know, 80% African American, this is where you need to be going? Like,
they aren't there yet. I'm trying. That's what I'm working on.
Okay.
So that's what I'm working on. But let me tell you this though. Do you realize that our children's test scores are a reflection of where teachers would score?
Never thought about that.
When I tell you just this year alone, the number of classrooms that I've observed, I had a more official estimate at 63%. I think as the year has gone on, 70% of the classrooms I observed, the teacher is teaching something incorrectly, using the wrong terminology, an incorrect model, or is not fully understanding their content. The teachers, for the most part, do not know the mathematics. I'm still going into classrooms. You may have learned math this way because I did. Right. We learned how to borrow and carry.
Yeah, correct.
I'm still hearing teachers use that language. That is not correct mathematics. You compose and decompose numbers, but you don't borrow. If you borrow some money from me, brother, that means I want it back.
There you go.
We're not giving it back.
Right. Fair.
So we have a lot of that going on. So I really dissect and dive into the essence and the beauty of mathematics.
Got it. Now, you were nominated for a presidential award for math. Like, can you talk about that experience and what was that like for you?
Yeah, I was one of the finalists in Illinois around 2009 or so. Okay. And so it was a process. I don't even remember who nominated for me. I had some heavyweights that were writing some letters. So I got as far as, I think that in the last round with Illinois, and then I think some white guy ended up winning for the state. Okay. So that was cool. But what happened a few years later, I was invited to the White House, this time from Michelle Obama and 2 of my students. And I went that time because it was a piece that she was doing on college. Okay. And my students at the time, students that were graduating from my high school, they had the second best record in the state of Illinois for persisting through college, because I was all about grit. You know, I would tell my students, it's not my job to love you. I love you, but it's not my job to love you. My job is to make you tough when you get out here in the real world, academically. And so my students would go through college, and when many freshmen dropped out, my students were persisting through. So I was invited for that. So it was a great experience. It's always, good to be acknowledged in that way for your work. I just want to have greater impact. I want to be able to do this with hundreds of thousands of children and truly start to turn the needle in a positive direction.
Yeah. And what strategies have you, put together, or what are your plans to turn that, around and deploy your practices and programs to, hundreds of thousands and millions of young people?
Well, I have to get out of the thing that I'm not good at. I prefer to chill and not be I'm the type. I've been in parties where John Legend was performing in one of the Pritzker's living room. And I'm like, hey, what time they serving the chocolate chip cookies so I can go home?
Right.
When I should have been networking.
Understood.
Right. And so that wasn't a strength of mine. I could have done better with that in the past. And so now I'm looking to do more of that, to strategize. And the big piece, though, is to train more people to do what I can do.
Right.
Because right now, you're not going to run across many people. First of all, you have to eliminate all people that aren't Black. So now you have Black people. How many mathematicians do you have that are Black, that know the African-centered content, that have an engineering, physics, and computer science background with it, and can bring lessons alive like that? And so it's not good to be a unicorn. We talk about, oh, that was the first Black person to do this. It's actually kind of lonely. And I would prefer to have more people that I can bounce ideas off of, and we get together and say, hey, let's replace Pearson or one of these big publishing companies and write an African-centered Black mathematics curriculum, right? So I'm looking to find out ways. I want to reach out to some local community colleges here and say, hey, is there a way that we can create an alternative path to get more Black people into teaching mathematics, particularly more Black men?
Yes, exactly. And when doing that and creating those curriculums, of course, I'm sure you have to align with, the state's standards and whatever the standards might be for each state if they're different nationally. But because of the methods that you are using to teach, like, is there ever a conflict or a collision of, well, we told them to teach math this way, where it might I don't want to say, it might conflict with how they're handling things on the standardized testing piece. Like,
no, I actually I love the standardized test.
Okay.
With its bias and all of that, because what I tell my teachers and what I did when I was still teaching, my students were beating the state averages. And the thing is that my fourth grade students, I had some of my students, 4th through 8th grade, that was passing the Lansing Community College entrance exam into mathematics. I believe in teaching mathematics so well that if your children left and went over to China, they could pass their standardized test. So I actually go to the standardized test, because what's happening is the teachers aren't using the standardized test the way that they want. Ask the average teacher how the test is broken down. Yeah. They're not going to be able to talk to you about type 1, type 2, and type 3 questions. They're not going to be able to tell you that 19% of the assessment is on reasoning, that 23% of the questions are on real-world applications that are a certain degree of difficulty.
Yeah.
So how do you expect for your students to do well on the assessment and you don't know it well? That would be like expecting to win the Super Bowl and you show up to practice in a tutu, not even understanding the sport.
Yeah, with the sport, right? I get it. Right. That makes sense.
So I'm fine with the assessment. The assessment, those standards are rigorous, and that's where I want my students to be. And I want them to crush it no matter where they're at. Not saying, oh, my teacher didn't teach it that way.
Right. And do you have a practice where you're able to, like, maybe, a lot of the schools have professional development in the summertime where they bring the teachers in, where you kind of engage with the school and, teach them how you should be teaching math in the classroom with this group of students? Because it seems like some of what your program is especially or specific to a group of students who need something that's more relatable. Like you said, I can talk about math through football, right? That's exactly what some of our youth in the community need. Right? Yeah,
and that's actually the biggest piece where I'm having impact. And so I recently picked up a contract working with some teachers in DC. I work with a couple of schools here in Chicago. I've worked with a school district in West Virginia. That's where the biggest bang is going to come from, because I can tell you right now, I've sat and worked with teachers that said, Hey, in this lesson here, Assata, I'm not understanding how they're doing partial quotients with long division, a fourth grade skill. And then I'm having to help the teachers with their content. But it's also very uncomfortable. When the first day when I'm doing my presentations, those teachers are not happy with me.
Okay.
Because what I do is I give them each a problem on a sheet of paper and say, here's your problem, come up to the board and explain it. One, they're afraid to do it. I say, oh no. How are you afraid to do it as an adult, but you call on your students to go to the front of the class every single day? Right? So that's the first piece. Then the next piece is when they're explaining, I said, no, that's not correct. And I let them know up front it's going to be very uncomfortable getting started because your practice is going to be on display. And I had one recently going back and forth with me. I mean, and he was hot. Eventually, halfway through the presentation, by the time we got to lunch, he said, I had been teaching math for 25 years and I thought I was a good math teacher. He said, now I realize that I do not know math at all. Yeah. So the professional development is where it's at, but I end up having to break them down and then say, hey, this is how you teach this concept. When I asked them what's place value, like they struggle with fully telling me what place value mean, but it's fundamental to all of the arithmetic operations.
I just don't.
It's fundamental to understanding binary and hexadecimal numbers that you use in computer science.
Right. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I don't understand how all the schools couldn't, would push back to having your program in there. Like it sounds amazing. I want to go back to school and take it because I mean it's necessary. And so with all your years in education, like what are some of the stories and the way you've practiced it, you've learned from others, and then what are some of the ways or stories that you've seen Black students thrive with the way that you've taught them math and engineering and physics and others?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are great stories of it when you go back to Robert Moses with the Algebra Project, right?
Okay.
And what he did in a very difficult time. I always say that, I've been able to be African-centered and for the people in a safe space. I went one time and did a protest here at a police shooting in Chicago, and they was leading protest. They was like, all right, everyone stop and lay on the ground. I laid on that ground and that cold hit my back. I said, oh no, I wouldn't have been for the 60s. I'm too soft for this. So I've been able to be revolutionary in a very comfortable space, right? But the ways in which I've seen this work, like I said, with Barb Moses, when I visited Dr. Onion Palmer's school, he has a school, he's deceased now, the Marcus Garvey Academy. I saw presentations like I had never seen before, science fair projects. Like it was high level and these Black students were crushing it.
Yeah.
And then for my own students, when I was a principal, I decided that I wanted an engineering class because I surveyed the graduates and I said, how many of you are going into a STEM field? It was at 0. I said, oh, no, not 0. I'm an engineer, right? And so I implemented an engineering class. And over the next couple of years, engineering became the #1 major, engineering and computer science of my students. And so at the time, the computer science, the college board, whoever it was, they said, if you were a state, if your school was a state, you would be ranked #7 based on the number of Black students you had taken AP computer science. I made AP computer science a requirement, not an elective. Everyone had to take it in order to graduate. And so when I look at those students now, I have students that are engineers, doctors, you name it, all over the country right now that I'm still in contact with.
Sure.
So I know what the power is of getting this right, no matter where they come from. No excuses. No, did they have a daddy? Did they not? And I tell them, nowhere on an application is it, what was your family life like?
Yeah, nobody cares.
Was your daddy at home? Yeah. Nowhere. So I don't do the excuses thing, right? Hold them accountable, set high expectations, deliver it with love, and let's get the job done.
Like a lot of the parenting styles have changed over the years, right? And it seems like, you've been doing this for a while. Like, what are some of the common misconceptions that you faced that you had to debunk when working with the parents? And, they say, well, that's not how my teacher is. The teacher's teaching my kid. Like, why is your way right? Like, what are some of those challenges been like for you?
One, I always viewed parents with respect and a partner. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, it's getting a little questionable now with social media, right?
Right.
But one of the misconception is that I'd never met a parent that didn't want their child to do well. And you have to understand that many parents had an abusive relationship with education. And so they're not very trusting. They don't want to come into the school. And so when I was a principal, when it was time for a student to come in during the day, I stood outside and greeted my parents. When it was a report card pickup, when I started as a principal, we had 25% of our parents showing up. I said, oh, no, 25%. I want 100%.
There you go.
So I had my counselors. I would tell the students, pull out your cell phone, test your parents right now. My teachers, I want you all outside. We're buying donuts and coffee as the parents drop the kids off. We're going to serve them donuts and coffee and say, hey, remember parent conferences tonight. And then we're going to monitor at every hour of conferences. I'm bringing food in. You know, Chicago, we got the Harris chicken with the mild sauce. Hey, when you come into the conferences, you got your mild chicken in you, right? Oh, you have trouble with the kids. We're going to have a babysitting room with video games and things like that in it. You think you're going to choke your child because their grades were bad? Go to the yoga room instead, right? So what I'm getting at is that if there is a problem, if 25% of parents are showing up, that is a problem. How do we get to 100%?
Yep.
And we got to 97%.
Impressive.
And I still wasn't happy. I went up there like, hey, Mr. King, Ms. Byers, we didn't hit our 100% mark. Call those parents and do a phone conference with them because I want 100%. If we go in with that mindset of excellence, with a laser focus on accomplishing a goal, we can get this done. So parents want their children to do well. It's how you interact and engage with them.
Got it. And you said, so you have a degree in engineering.
My degree is actually in mathematics.
It's in mathematics.
I started off
okay.
in engineering.
You started off in engineering.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask.
But what happened, I stopped going to school. Once I started teaching at the charter school when I was 18, I loved it so much, I stopped going to college for quite a few years.
Got it.
So mind you, I'm teaching without even a degree at this point. And then by the time they was like, hey, you need to finish because I'm traveling the country. I'm doing professional development. And they was like, hey, at some point, people are going to pull your credentials.
Right.
You need, mind you that I'm teaching teachers though. And so I went back in, I was like, hey, what's the fastest way to get a degree? They was like, hey, with all these mathematics credits, this would be the fastest route to finish. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, I led to that question because I have encountered several people who have engineering degrees but went into the classroom. Right. And so I was just curious what that dynamic might be like, being able to teach someone the mathematic piece from an educational standpoint, but having this wealth of knowledge on what engineering looks like. Because I was one of those kids who was told to be an engineer by a math teacher, but didn't know anything about engineering. Right. So, I was kind of lost, like, oh, I'm really good at math. This is a great career, but now what? Right. So I think there's a gift. There isn't quite a program right now for educators who are math teachers and science teachers, and then connecting it to the career, right? And so that's kind of what I've done. Like, how you bridge the gap between that? It sounds like you've been able to do that very successfully with the students and everything, everyone that you're working with. So are you doing any programs locally there in Chicago, or are your programs global?
No, they're global, and so we have the tutoring component. And then I do professional development where I go in with different schools and things like that and work with them directly. This summer, in the summers, I usually go to New York to Brooklyn College and do an in-person class there with their trios program.
Okay.
And so I'm looking to, like I said, expand those offerings to really get in and do more professional development, because just one person, you can have some impact. But now if there are 100 teachers that can do what it is that I do, and they're in charge of classrooms or they're coaches, now you really start to have some serious impact. So I'm wherever people call me.
Okay, good. And so you do things locally, globally, you do the workshops, but what about if a parent has a child and they just want to get a kit? Like, is there like an at-home kit that can be purchased and brought into the home?
I have some courses. I'm moving things over to another platform. And so I do these courses where I do a deep dive into comments. So I have 2 fraction courses out, and then I'm about to work on a program called Everything Your Child Needs to Know Before Kindergarten.
Okay.
And this is geared towards making sure that your preschool students start off on the right foot, because they're those babies at that age, like, they're ready to soak it all up.
Right.
And so I have these courses that I'll be having on a new platform shortly.
So in your opinion, do you feel like STEM communities or Black communities can be impacted by STEM economically and socially?
That is my fundamental belief. I like when I go through the data and you look at where Black students are majoring,
Hmm.
and then you tie that to their income and their ability to build good credit scores to be able to afford a home. That is why I push so heavily for the STEM fields. If you were to if you look at the data with Black folks compared to Asians, Asians make up about 5-6% of the population, but they make up like 18% of the STEM majors.
Yep.
So they are they're coming in 3 times heavier than what they need to. When you look at Black people, we make up about 14% of the demographics, right? But we make up only about 5%. So we're that's a 9x
Yeah.
difference. They're 3 times over, we're third. That's a 9x differential. So that's like us showing up to compete against them. It's one of us and it's 9 of them. And so, and I ask people all the time, when was the last time you saw a Chinese social worker in a school? You're not seeing them major in psychology.
That's true.
What does Silicon Valley look like? And then if you go look at the data, the top earners in this country are Asian people. They beat white folks out even by a couple of $10,000-$20,000. Right.
Yeah.
So it has a huge impact. The number one earners in this country are Asian men.
What are some of the careers that Black people need to be focused on in the STEM field?
Right now, programming now for artificial intelligence, data security, engineering, some of your top engineering, aeronautical engineering, paper science, things that we don't even talk about, metallurgical engineering study and medicals and things like that. Pure mathematics, just taking mathematics is the 11th best career of the future, just taking straight mathematics. Going into the medical field in the state of Illinois alone, a few years ago, there was an article out that said the rate at which Black men going into the medical field is decreasing. It's almost like a pandemic because the numbers are decreasing. If you look at the number of Black men principals in Chicago, it's about 2.5%. And the rate that Black men are going to college is also about 2.5%. Right? So we have to take a look at what is the data telling us.
Yep.
The data is telling us when we represent more children going to the field, and that the more people that go into the engineering field, the greater their economic impact. Personally, when I think about my students that graduated STEM, they're most likely married, and 2, they own their own home.
That's a great result from going into the STEM field, right? Yeah.
And we're having conversations with them as adults, 30 or 33 years old, or ages that they're at now. You know, we're talking about investing in crypto.
Yeah.
Hey, Mama Sada, they either call me Mama Sada or Miss Moore. Hey, I'm looking at getting a property. Hey, what do you think about Ethereum? Hey, what about these ETFs?
Yeah.
Those are the conversations that they're having.
Excellent. So what's next for Black Math Genius?
Black Math Genius, we're actually going to be Black Math Genius, the name is at my heart, but I'm looking at using my last name and becoming more math geniuses.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. That hit right there. That's the one.
Right. So I want to do more Math Genius, still having to focus on Black students, and that's only because they're hurting more.
Yep.
But for real, the whole country is just in the gutter when it comes to our academic prowess.
Yeah. And so how do you, with that being the case, like, you know, we got to look at the whole entire country, the world. Like, how do you plan on expanding your message and your practices in mathematics and engineering and physics?
And that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. Like, how do I get it out here like that, right? And so I'm actually, you know, of course, social media is a big thing, but I need more people out here with me that's speaking. I need to get on larger platforms. I have a book that's coming out. I actually want to do a TED Talk. I want to do more of these types of interviews. Ideally, I want to even train and get more like students where they're in high school, like students that are exceptional in high school, and helping to put this out there I'll be doing a program this summer with this guy who was in the data science field. He does stuff with IBM and AWS,
Yeah.
but he struggles to get students in because the mathematics isn't there. So I'll be doing a program with him to make sure that they're good for workforce development. Out of Detroit, one of the biggest things in Detroit right now, we're trying to get the students into the trades, is that they can't do the basic math. They can't even read a tape measure.
What?
So again, with their workforce development program, a lot of money is sitting there in Detroit.
Yeah.
Programs are waiting there, but they can't get the kids. Like I said, the sister called me, this was last year. She said, yes, we can't get them past the basic skills. She said they cannot read a tape measure. Yeah.
I don't have any words for that one. I mean, like, and of course, you know, I started my programs in Detroit. I do robotics programs with kids because that's what I do professionally.
Are you familiar with DAPSEP?
Oh, yeah. Very familiar. Yeah. They had it around when
Okay,
I was a kid.
I worked with DAPSEP at Michigan State.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I know the brother that started that, Jason.
Yeah, I know him as well. You know, he's in Chicago now.
I did not know that. Yeah. I know they had
started
new
the
leadership.
Chicago version of DAPSEP. It's not as good because Kobo used to be packed
Right.
with folks. It's not as big as it was in Detroit during that time. But yeah, he has a program here in Chicago that he's doing.
Excellent. Well, I tell you this, like, whatever it takes to, you know, push your program forward into the future and expand to a broad and broader audience, you have my support individually and, you know, from the BlerdOut movement.
I really appreciate that.
Indeed. Like, I'm a big fan of the work you've already done. Like I said, I'm in robotics, and I'm always looking for new ways to kind of increase the path for our young Black youth, you know, in the community. Is like, how do I get you over the hump with this? I use robotics, and the math is in the robotics.
Let a robotics. You know, we used to get those NXT bricks and be a part of those first Lego League competitions in Novi.
Okay.
Novi, yeah, we used to go there.
I started the first Black robotics Lego League team in Detroit many years ago. And it was frightening for my students, but now you see many of them. But, you know, again, back to kind of the nature of the work that you do is like, how do we see ourselves? So we're now working on our own competition so that they can see themselves in there, right? And we need to do it our way, right? It's got to relate to something that's cool to us. So that's what the whole
any help or anything you need with that and connecting with more folks. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, definitely. We're gonna be talking. I just want to say thank you for being on the podcast show today.
Thank you so much.
Black math geniuses or more math geniuses needs to be in every school, every organization. You know, I'm gonna be talking to you. I want to figure out how I can bring it to my own organization and put it in front of my students and other students across the country. So thank you again for joining us today on the BlerdOut podcast.
All right. Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it. I love this. This is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Confidence, yeah. It really shouldn't be no arguments, cause you're now viewing the greatest of all time.